Welcome to the African Utility Week studio. I am Denise. I'm a content manager for njarati.com. And in the studio here today we have Imraan Mohamed, marketing director at Itron. And today we're going to be discussing about is Africa optimizing their investments and their assets? What's happening now?
Yeah, I think there's been an interesting recent report from the International Energy Agency looking at investments from 2000 to 2014, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa. So I'll be talking more about Sub-Saharan Africa. And I think there's some interesting points come out of it. I think there's been probably around $55 billion per annum spent in Sub-Saharan Africa in the energy sector. Out of that, 10 billion is for power sector specific investment. But what's interesting is that, two-thirds of it, $55 billion investment, is actually going towards the export of energy. So a lot of the investment is being put there, but because of the state of the economy and the Sub-Saharan Africa power sector, a lot of that money is spent actually on export. So I think that's the first very interesting point that struck me, is that how do we change that scenario so that we start investing more on developing Africa instead of I understand governments need access to funds to develop the economies, but somewhere along the line I think that the ratio is a bit off. That's one part, and I think on the power sector specifically, as I said, about $10 billion, but if you consider the enormous challenges and work to be done in terms of almost 300 million people in Africa out of 900 million don't have access to basic electricity. We're sitting in Cape Town in South Africa, we know the load shedding scenario, it's even worse in other African countries. So I think just to simulate the economy and get the business going, there's a lot of challenges and money to be spent in those sectors.
Just going to those particular challenges of keeping that power back and developing your own power grid and your own infrastructure, how do you think these challenges are going to be overcome? Where do they start?
As I said, I think the challenge is not unique to the power sector. If you look at outside Africa, there's generally a reasonably well-established electricity energy sector. People have access to education, they have access to electricity. The challenge is how to manage the growth and the changes in market conditions. Whereas in Africa, we have to manage those changes, but we also got to manage the missing gap. And I think that makes it a bit more challenging, because you have focus groups looking at the power sector, and then you've got bigger groups looking at government level, at regulatory level, looking at general living beyond the power sector. So it's getting clean food, bringing down the manual gas used for cooking, etc. So I think the challenge is sometimes the visions are not always 100% aligned, and it makes it difficult to fund the energy and the investment to find a balance between the two. As I said, two-thirds of energy investment for export. Somewhere along the line, I think they need to manage those priorities better.
Absolutely. Why aren't they getting enough capital, enough investment into these energy projects? Are the projects just not bankable? Are they not presenting them properly? What are the challenges?
I mean, one of the I've seen, for example, in some of the projects or forums that I've been at, is there's a lot of if you look at the power sector, there's a lot of investment on the generation side, on renewable energy, and it makes sense because of the shortage in capacity we have in general, as well as grid reliability. So I think there's a lot of investment focus on that segment. The downside is that it's all one seamless. For example, as end consumers, I'm not in a generation level, transmission level, but I'm being affected in my daily life as an end user of electricity. And I think there's not enough balance between focusing some of that money into industrial, commercial, and even residential. I think the residential and commercial element in the power sector is becoming so crucial with renewables, is that they have a voice, they have a decision, they have an influence in the direction it goes. So I think the first point is there's too much emphasis, rightly so, on the generation side, and not enough on the value chain further down. So I think that's something that can be addressed. A good example of how, so that's on the energy sector side. I think the other challenges is you have stakeholders like government. It's also the funding. What kind of funding mechanisms are there? Who's willing to put the funds down? So I think from a funding point of view, there's been a move towards building what they call PPPs, private-public funding together, also with the community involvement. So I think one of the really good successful examples is the South Africa's renewable energy PPP program. I think that's obviously it has its challenges, but it's a really good example of where you've got all stakeholders coming together, including communities, public funding, private funding, and breaking down the challenge into smaller, manageable chunk sizes with achievable benefit that can be seen and felt and touched in 2 or 3 year period. And I think that's the challenge.
Are you saying, sorry to interrupt you, that community should be concentrating on creating almost small sort of community energy projects, so almost like microgrids?
I mean, another good example is, we're talking about this in South Africa, but yes. I mean, I've just read up about a microgrid that's set up in the rural communities in Kenya.
Yes.
So I think part of the challenge of the traditional way of thinking is, there's a lot of investment in building the energy infrastructure, feeding mainly the urban population, the industrial, commercial sectors, and to reach that last, rural sectors as well. It's a lot of extra investment, a lot of time. The cost per point and the time is prohibitive. And what we're seeing is now Africa has the opportunity to leapfrog some of those challenges and build sort of sustainable community-based microgrids so that they get access to electricity quickly, sooner than waiting for the big grid approach.
Well, this is it. I was speaking to Mr. Kibido from the transmission sort of planning at Eskom, and he was saying that there's a major problem or gap in communication or planning between the renewables, so the bids, as soon as those bids have been completed, and then there's no network available. And that network could take up to 7 years to build. So you've got willing project managers to get started on renewable energy generation, and then there's no transmission network. And apparently they are bridging this gap, but that is a huge problem.
And you can well imagine sitting in the traditional utilities decision maker shoes. It's not easy. I mean,
no.
I think one of the realization that needs to happen is that we globally, in the fundamental, significantly fundamental transformation of the industry in all aspects, not just from a technology point, but from role players. I mean, utilities, you talked about this transmission.
Yes.
I think one of the first things that needs to happen is people, especially utility business, they understand this for many years and they have such a vital role to play going forward, but they have to break the mold of how they used to do things. So, a microgrid is a reality, renewable energy is a reality, because we can't address all these challenges of lack of power, etc. So I think it requires a fundamental shift in all the stakeholders. Yes, it's not comfortable for some of them, but I think the only way to solve it is to really understand, listen, this is fundamental. How can I reinvent myself when I have such an important role to play and make it work in the new way of doing things? I think it's actually a mindset change of how you do business and how you think about solutions.
Well, I mean, you can't stick to the old ways because clearly they're not working, and infrastructure has to change, generation has to change, so absolutely right. I would absolutely agree with you on that one. With regards to Itron, what are the plans in Southern Africa and in Africa as a whole? What are the plans going forward?
So I think, for those of you that know Itron's a trusted partner in the utility sector. We've been around for many, many years. We're active in the electricity, gas and water sectors. I think that's a unique thing for us because if you look at Africa, especially some Nigeria, Tanzania, Mozambique, Angola, the gas finds, it's a exciting new source of energy over the next decade or two that really will develop. So I think with the reliance on pure, traditional electricity that we used to, there are other energy sources coming up. So I think for us it's very exciting that we're able to play in all these spaces. That's the first thing. I think in Africa we've been very successful with all the major utilities in terms of bringing what we call meter to cash or revenue collection solutions. So we'll continue to play in that space in terms of prepayment, smart payment. But what's exciting is that with these changes we talked about, renewable energy, PV, smarter grids, I think the dynamics are changing, and we're excited about expanding our experience and offerings to start addressing solutions in these new areas of renewables. A good project, for example, we're working on is the City Power Smart Meter project. What's exciting now is, like all smart meter projects, they take time to get going. But I'm quite excited that we're now moving into a phase where we can start using the investment made to solve real problems like load shedding. Instead of load shedding, can we load limit? We've heard some press releases of the city of Johannesburg, the mayor, excited about these new solutions. So I think that's really exciting for us. Is we've always said you need to lay a foundation of investment, but you don't always see the potential of using the benefits of all of those over time.
Exactly.
And I think utilities in Africa were very focused on revenue collection, But all of a sudden now, with all these challenges hitting us at the same time, where I'm sitting at home and I don't have power, and the kids I don't know what to do because of...
they can't use their tech.
So I think I'm excited about using those projects to actually unlock the value that we've seen coming. So that's some exciting projects we're doing right in South Africa. And as I said, a lot of PV projects, renewable projects. Itron has got solutions. You know, we have hosted offerings, we have managed services, and we have the know-how of how to use that data, whether it's electricity, gas, or water, to really find the benefits for utilities. So I think those are exciting times for us.
As you are sitting here now, if you had one big message to give utilities, whether it's Southern Africa or Africa as a whole, what would your message be? I know it's very broad, but do you have, from Itron's perspective, what would your advice be to utilities today?
I think if I can take the liberty, not just for utilities, I think the whole energy has transformed, and it's no more about just utilities. I think the key message is collaboration. It's about the utilities, it's about the communities, it's about vendors like ourselves, it's about government, and I think the message for me is let's work together to try to build a, let's tap this vast energy resources that Africa has to build a modern, efficient utility grid, so that we have, we can elevate poverty totally, we can increase education levels to 100%, so that we have a sustainable, usable economy for Africa. And I think, as I said, I think sometimes we get caught into the power sector, and I think this is fundamental change. We need the help of all the stakeholders, and maybe the message for government and policymakers as well. I think they really need to start delivering on their ambitions to make the economic development climate more easy, so that these projects can happen. So in terms of making sure regulations in place, making sure there's different funding mechanisms, making sure there's donor funds or there's government, but there's also other types of investment partnerships. And I think the key message is let's have a vision, let's have clear targets. For example, as I said, 1/3 of Africa doesn't have. Let's give ourselves a target. Can we say 2040?
Attainable targets as well at that.
99%. And I think when you give yourself targets, you then force yourself to make attainable small wins to achieve that target. I think sometimes there's too many targets at a broad level, unrelated. And I think that for me is, let's look at it holistically, and let's make attainable targets to actually achieve this vision of a viable economy in Africa with a modern, efficient, available grid.
Fantastic. A holistic point of view is what Imraan is suggesting today. Very, very good point of view as well. Thank you very, very much for your time today, and I trust that the conference will be successful going forward. Enjoy the last 2 days. And thank you to our viewers for spending some time with us. Do look at the Enjurati site. There are other studio interviews that will be published, and I hope you enjoy them. Thank you.